It's my pleasure to introduce again Mona Esposito, who you heard in the previous session on the panel of Grain Changers. Mona is also known as the Grain Lady. She's co-founder of Noble Grain Alliance, a nonprofit aimed at restoring heritage grains to Colorado. And she also was a founding board member of the Colorado Grain Chain and its first president. She works with growers, chefs, bakers, and consumers as a heritage grain consultant. She's been an avid baker for many years and is passionate about the use of 100% heritage whole grains in her baking and an advocate of the superior nutrition and flavor you find in whole grains. Claudia Bouvier grew up in Brazil with a large Italian family. She moved to the United States for her career as a civil engineer. But she also dreamed about fresh pastas of her childhood and the memories of her travels in Italy. She first learned the art of pasta making as a child with her Italian grandparents, and later through professional classes at the International Culinary Center in New York and at the Laboratorio Sfoglia e Pasta Fresca della Salumeria in Bologna, Italy. Claudia and her husband Ted launched Pastificio Boulder in 2018. Along the way, they've partnered with like-minded farmers committed to growing organic heritage grains, milled their own flour, and experimented with numerous small-scale pasta production and drying techniques. And two of their pastas very recently were awarded the 2021 Good Food Awards, which is a wonderful honor for their company and for the whole grain pasta movement. She also advocates for sustainable agriculture and serves on the boards of two Colorado nonprofits called Growing Gardens and also Slow Food Boulder County. I'd like to begin with Mona, and please tell us about your work as a consultant, as an advocate. We're all ears.
Thanks, Andrew. That was great. That was a great video. Got me in the mood to be in the kitchen. So in the last panel from grain to from was it seed to feed? Yes, grains to seed and food. You know, we talked about growing grains and establishing local grain communities and heritage varieties and ancient varieties, and you know how to build a community, local grain community, and access these grains. And so, you know, that sort of the next logical step is, you know, how do we cook with these grains? How do we use these grains? Because, you know, they, in addition to having incredible nutritional value, what really gets me excited about working with these different varietals are the flavors and how unique each of the grains are, both in their applications and you know, in their what they can bring to your kitchen and to what you are already doing with grains. So I'm going to approach it that way. And Andrew, if you could come to the next slide.
So Mona, are you seeing a display of your slides?
Yeah.
I know it's not. I'll go back.
Perfect, but it's great.
Yeah, I'll go back to putting. You want the next one, right?
No, this one's good.
Oh, okay.
So I'll just set the color wheel back here also. So, you know, this. I decided to create this analogy when trying to understand the different wheat varietals of a color wheel. And I love this analogy because it really, it's based on creativity. And that's really the beauty of working with these heritage grains, is that you have a color palette. You have a basic, your primary colors, and then Andrew, I don't see the. There we go. Thanks. And then you want to understand, just like when you paint, once you understand the fundamentals of each of the different varietals, you can learn, you can get creative, and you can expand, and you can play around with these in your kitchen. And I also like the sort of the play on words on palette, what color palette versus your taste palette, because that's what we'll be looking at, how your palette for taste responds to these unique flavors. Okay, and you can go to the next one, please. Andrew, can you do the next slide? Super. Yep. No, perfect. Great. So I'll just put this up again to the screen. So much like a color wheel for painting, you have your primary colors, your reds and your yellow, your red, your yellow, and your blue, right? And I have divided these up into 3 different categories of wheats: hard wheats, soft wheats, and the ancient wheats. And so what I'll do is I'll just give a background on what the characteristics are for each of these. Andrew, can you get that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry for technical difficulties. There we go. The third one would be great. So I have this broken down into different different categories. The characteristics of, so basically this is to help you understand how you can use these wheats in your kitchen and how you can start to integrate them into what you already do, into what you already are used to, to what you would use wheat for already in your kitchen, be it baking bread, making pasta, making cakes, cookies, pie crusts, anything like that. So this is a way, an entry point into playing around with these heritage varieties that are coming back into play. So, no longer would you take your bag of all-purpose flour. Instead, you would stock your pantry in a way that the grains, the varieties that you have on hand, could be used for the things that you're already baking in your kitchen. So, for example, the hard red and white wheats, they're are high protein, high gluten quality, and their best applications are for, and this is just in a purist, if you were just to choose one of these wheats for baking bread and pizza, you couldn't go wrong with a hard red or white wheat, because they have the characteristics necessary to make bread, to form the gluten structure that kind of baking requires. And so what these hard red and white wheats bring to your cooking and your baking is the flavor and texture. They're nutty and they're sweet, and they really have that depth of flavor. And some examples of these are turkey red, red fife, Rouge de Bordeaux. Those are all hard red wheats. And some hard white wheats are Clark's green, and Satanism is available. So that could be, depending on what you are looking to do in your own kitchen. If you do bake a lot of breads, pitas, pizzas, having one of these varieties on hand would be essential. Okay, let's go to the next one. And so the next category, the next color in the wheel, are the these soft heritage wheats. And generally they are white in color, not in refinement. And some of the characteristics of the soft white wheats are that they have a low protein, which translates to a low gluten quality. So they are best used if you were just to use a soft wheat in applications that don't require a lot of gluten strength. So, for example, pie crusts are a great example. Cakes, cookies, tortillas. I actually use soft white wheat quite a bit when I'm making fresh pasta at home, either with an egg pasta or a flour and water pasta, because of the texture it creates. And it doesn't need to stand up to, because it's all by hand, it doesn't really need to stand up to machinery. So that works well at home for me. And for the soft white wheats, they blend a lighter flavor, um, buttery flavor. Even the texture is a bit lighter, and so they are. And the varietal that is most popular and most widely available, really, is a Sonoran white wheat. Great. Okay, so let's go to the third primary color, which is the ancient wheats. And this is sort of a tricky category because within the ancient wheats, I'll start with the varietals first. We have, 4 different widely available, fairly well-known varietals of einkorn, emmer, spelt, and kamut. And although they all fall into the category historically of being ancient wheats, and that's really just falls along a timeline of how long they have been cultivated. Their characteristics really do vary. So this is an important one to really understand what each of the varietals brings to its application. So they range from being they're all actually very high in protein, and the reason I have the differentiation between, because sometimes you might think, oh, high protein equals high gluten quality, and so therefore I could use this for something like bread that needs a lot of gluten structure. Well, in fact, some of these ancient grains, like einkorn in particular, and emmer as well, do not have a high gluten quality. So it is actually fairly difficult to work with einkorn in an artisan bread loaf, and it just has a completely different texture. So that's just one of the varieties to be aware that it really does behave differently, and it's not as easy to substitute. So I always just recommend starting with a smaller percentage of einkorn with any thing you might be making: pasta, pie crust, cakes. Not so much cakes and cookies, but in the bread realm, because one of the benefits of the einkorn is it really has an incredible flavor. So it really does shine in things like cakes and cookies, and in smaller percentages, it really adds to the flavors of your pasta and your pie crust and your flatbreads. So that would be true for emmer as well. And so spelt is more like all-purpose flour. It's really most closely related to the modern wheats that we know today, and its structure and its performance. And then kamut is actually related to durum wheat. So it in addition to having this beautiful golden semolina color, it really works well in pastas because it is in the durum family, and it's a hard wheat that really finds great expression in pastas as well. Okay, so that is sort of your foundation, and just like in art, once you learn the foundation, you can go ahead and play around and create and look at how you can combine these different wheats to highlight what is most interesting to you, be it the flavor, the texture. So Andrew, can we go to the next one? I don't know if it, oh, thank you, Andrew. So this is the part that I really love, which is working with the palette and blending the different types of wheat and the different varietals to create different textures, flavors, and visuals. So when I'm and just, I know it's a little bit hard to see this color wheel even on the slide with the writing, but it is on my website, and then there is more detail on the website as well. But basically, what I've illustrated is, what happens when you start to play around and you blend the different varieties. So for example, I'm a bread baker, and when I bake bread, I like to combine some hard wheats with a soft wheat. And what that can achieve is, a change in the flavor and the texture of your crumb. The Sonoran white, really adds an amazing creaminess to bread. And as long as I can balance the percentages of the hard wheat with the soft wheat, then once I've learned that the hard wheats really are necessary, at least in a percentage of about 50%, I would always start there, and then I know that I have the necessary strength and structure to create bread. And so that's one example. And another example would be, combining, as I started to say about the einkorn flavors is really is a unique, amazing flavor that when combined with, for example, in bread, if you wanted to add it to your bread to add some of that flavor, but you knew that the emmer didn't have the gluten structure necessary, you could add something like 10% to your bread just to gain some of that. So really, these are all just suggestions, and that's the beauty of this, is that really you can get very creative once you know the fundamentals of how each of these types of wheat behave. You can really get creative according to your own palate and according to what you like to make in your kitchen. And so I want to hone in a little bit on each of these categories that, when you blend. And one of them I really wanted to look at is some of this could really just be visually. Perhaps you are more interested in a lighter loaf, right, of bread. You like lighter colored. And so, here's some, this is a hard, I don't know if you can see, this is hard to do on the screen, a hard white wheat that is, they're both hard wheats, but how does this look, Andrew? I don't know if you can see, this is a white wheat and this is a red wheat. So some things about the color also affect the flavor. So white wheats usually have, the tannins are taken out of the bran, so there's a reduced bitterness. So it not only affects the color, but it also affects the flavor. So once you know that, you can decide, okay, this bread that I'm making, or this pasta that I'm making, we could use pasta, for example. Really, I'm going to pair it with a sauce that's really rich and heavy, and so I want a pasta that has flavor, that can stand up to a complex sauce like that. So you might, in that case, choose a darker wheat that has that depth of flavor, or you might add a little einkorn or anything like that. So these are really just ideas for you to get started. If I were to suggest, what to have as a foundation in your whole grain pantry, if you're just starting out, I would certainly suggest one from each of the primary colors. So starting with a hard red or white wheat, a soft wheat, and one of the ancient grains. And from there, really first getting to know each of the grains that you choose on their own. And I'll take this from a point of view of bread baking. Before you start to blend, just like with color theory, before you start to blend your colors and your varietals, to get an understanding of each of the varieties on their own. So before you might, if you were baking with turkey red, a hard red wheat, I would bake 100% turkey red just to really get an understanding of how that grain behaves and the flavor. And then in subsequent bakes, I might add slowly percentages of a soft white wheat like Sonoran to see how that affects the flavor and the texture. And that's how I would play around with that. And then Andrew, do I have a little more time, or am I?
Mona, I wish I could say we do, but because we started.
Okay.
Are you okay?
Perfect.
The color wheel was wonderful.
Yeah. So,
and I think you haven't been able to read the chat, but I think people want to make sure they can have access to that. So it's at your website, right? Okay. That was a.
Yep. And everything on the website and all that stuff, and recipes. So there are, recipes for people to get started, and I'm excited for Claudia to dive into the pasta.
Thank you, Mona. That was a great way to learn about blending. The analog to color blending. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take it away, Claudia.
All right, thank you. So, hi everyone, I'm Claudia. I'm a pasta maker, and I run with Ted a company in Boulder called Pastificio Boulder. We do specialize in heritage and ancient varieties of wheat. So what we basically do is we try to get our wheat as local as possible, as locally as possible. And, we collaborate with farmers. I'm not sure if everyone was here for the previous session, and there was a lot of conversation about this. So what we do is we collaborate with farmers, and we tell them, we are interested in using those different varieties of wheat. And we have done, the full range. We have worked with, from Blue Emmer to Red 5 to White Sonora to Durham. And we do try to get those special varieties. The reason why is its flavor, to start with. If you try a different wheat like we have here, this is called, I'm not sure if you can see, but it's called Blue Emmer. And we have done pastas that are 100% Blue Emmer. It's nutty, it has so much flavor. So one, the main, it's flavor. The second is nutrition. Those kinds of wheats, they are just amazing in terms of nutrition. And the third one that is, a big thing in this summit is biodiversity. By us going to the farmers and try to get them to grow more of this, and also communicating them with our consumers and educating and talking and, going to the farmers market and talking, the idea of going to basically a wine store and knowing that there are all those different kinds of grape varieties and different kinds of wines being produced. We don't have that with wheat. It's starting to have a sort of a renaissance. So by us talking to the consumers, they are more open every time they listen to heritage and ancient, and they might use for different purposes too. So that's what we do. We do get to fresh mill the majority of our wheat. So we basically get them in berry form. We fresh mill in-house. We get that 100% flour, whole grain flour, and we blend with semolina. And depending on what we are trying to do, it's normally at least 50% of this fresh milled whole grain flour with semolina or something else that we are trying to achieve. When I was talking about, different wheats and, the hard and the winter and the spring and white, we do blend them the majority of the time. So durum, it is really the basis of pasta, especially the kind of pasta that we make that is extruded. So it's a hard wheat, and we get durum. We often blend with kamut, because kamut has a very creamy, beautiful texture. And we add, let's say, either turkey red or red 5 or blue amber. So we do play with those different varieties most of the time. We do also, for the local market, make specific pastas. Let's say we do have a collaboration with the Lewis Farm in Colorado, and they are growing an amazing variety of wheat. I don't know if you can see. So basically, this is called Bluebeard durum. It's an ancient variety of durum. So they grew this last year, and we are trying to get them to grow every year to get the wheat to, adjust to Colorado. And we are making a pasta that is 100% dead durum. So we do play. I think what we try to achieve, it is to have a very unique flavor. And we feel that the reds and the heritage varieties, they have a lot of that. Also, the functionality of us being able to extrude and, just bringing more the connection between the farmers, the locality, the space we are to the consumer on the other side. So going to the specifics of pasta, if I were to break it down into different, two big groups, one would be the handmade pasta, which you can just make in your kitchen. And the second one is the extruded pasta. The processes of getting them to be transformed from flour and water, or flour and eggs, or flour and egg yolks, it's completely different. A lot of people ask me like, so how do I make like rigatoni at home? It's a kind of a pasta that it's extruded. So what does it mean? When you're making handmade pasta, what you do is you basically get your flour, you mix with either eggs or water, and you develop the gluten in the dough. So you mix, different ways of doing it, like grandmother style, which is that volcano, you put the eggs in and you go slowly incorporating. Or, which is totally acceptable, is to use a mixer at home, flour and eggs or flour and water and a hook, and then you just develop that ball of dough. What you're doing is, by incorporating your liquid to the flour, you're just developing the protein in the wheat. So basically, that's one way of making pasta. The second one, and it's what we do commercially, it's called extruding. And an extruder is basically, I would say, it's a big espresso machine where you mix the water and the flour, and you just kind of lightly hydrate. you do not get a ball of dough. You just fluff it up, hydrate. And then once we have that mix, we press through the machine that dough with pressure and a tiny, tiny bit of heat. And then that goes through, let's see if I can just grab this and show you. It goes through something called a die. So this is a bronze die. You know, this is one of the shapes that we're about to create. So as it goes through those openings, it does create a shape and it falls on the tray. And then we can either use it as fresh, or we're going to go through a slow drying process. You know, here we do about from 36 to 48 hours, 48 hours. So it's completely different processes. If I'm going to go back to the home kitchen and you want to make different kinds of pastas and try to incorporate this, those different kinds of wheats, we do fresh meal because we feel it does add so much more flavor and texture. The most commonly used meal at home is the stone grinding. And, you know, if you set it up in the, you know, the highest setting where you can get the finest flour, it's better for pasta. With bread, you can play with more with textures. And pasta, what we try to do is as fine as you can, because you do want to have that very, you know, light texture, that bite, that it doesn't have that much of the harshness. We mill our flour and we use a different kind of mill. It's called an impact mill. And we are able to achieve very, very fine, powdery kind of flour. You know, when you hear, you know, the semolina and the semola and the doppio zero is how fine the flour is. And for pasta making, the finer it is, the better it is, especially when you're extruding. At the home kitchen, you can play more with them, and it's acceptable, you know, to use a stone mill and grind it at the lowest setting as you can. You know, texture is good too. So this is the milling process. You know, semolina is something that you can look at many packages of craft pastas. And semolina is basically the endosperm of the wheat called durum. Endosperm is the white part, which is the yellow part in durum. You know, it's a yellow wheat. And we blend semolina with 100% whole grain flour. So this is one part, you know, there are those two different processes. Homemaking pasta, you develop the dough, as I said, you mix in whatever way you want to mix, and you let it rest. You know, I do at least 20, 30 minutes on the rest, because that is going to be the part where the gluten is being developed. And you do want a pasta that has a lot of pliability and elasticity, because you're going to open that dough. In terms of opening the dough, again, there are a zillion different ways of doing it. You know, you can use the rolling pin. In Italian language, the most appropriate rolling pin, it's called mattarello, which is basically a really big one. And there's a whole technique to open it. You know, you kind of cross your arms and you rotate the dough, and you go little by little to get it to super thin. Italians say, like, you should be able to read the newspaper through it. And it's an art in itself to do that. I've spent time in Bologna, and I learned from very traditional pasta makers, and it's just beautiful to see it done. It requires quite a lot of skill to do that, to get to that really, really thin, as they call it, sfoglia. You know, the name is sfolina or sfolini, comes from the ladies that make, the esfolia, which is the sheet where you do different kinds of pastas. So that's one way. The other way that you can do, and it's very easy to find, it's the manual pasta machine. It does have the two different sides. This kind of attaches to this one. And I have heard so many people, I do have this at home, I never used. It's pretty easy to do with this, and you're going to be happier with how thin you can get your dough. The thing with this, it's a manual. You attach to the table, and then you roll the dough. Inside of this, I don't know if you can see, but there are two rollers that go like this, and you can adjust. So you start with the widest setting, and then little by little by little by little, you go getting them close to each other, which means that your dough is going to be thinner. The third way that I do here at Pastificio is something like this. It's a professional sheeter. The way of doing it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same mechanism as this, but it's a bigger. It's easier to deal with. A lot of people have KitchenAids, and KitchenAid has a pasta attachment, which is just this part. This is the cutter, but they do have the rollers, and it works amazingly. It's awesome. So, whichever way you are doing, it works. I think a lot of people feel pretty, worried about dealing with pasta making, but in the end, it's just flour and water, flour and eggs. And, you shouldn't feel intimidated by that. I think it's just kind of the more you do, the more you learn. There are a couple of things, I wish I had a couple hours just to talk to you about this, but because time is limited, there are a couple little things that I would suggest in terms of rolling the dough. And one is your dough needs to be right in a sense that is not too sticky or too dry. So that's the main fundamental. The second one is, as you're rolling, you have to keep in mind two big things. One is at every pass, you're trying to get it thinner. And the other one is the geometry. And the more regular you get, the better it is. Andrew, I don't know if the time, how, I can't hear you.
You have a couple minutes.
Okay, so let me know, and I'll keep talking as much as I can. So I think in terms of pasta making is that we do have other ways of doing pasta, besides opening this folia. You can do the gnocchis, the cavatellis. You can use different things like the rolling pin that you can do gaglianelli or cavatelli. If I were to tell you one main thing is, especially in pasta making, is it is fun. And it's something that besides the wheat, besides the milling, besides the texture, it is something that it's very convivial. And it's worth to explore and try different ways of doing. It's awesome with kids. And there's so much to learn. If you try to use those heritage varieties, it's experimental. And I don't think there's any limit to how much you can play with that. Andrew, do you want to go to maybe some questions? Might be more helpful.
I'm sorry, we have another session that's starting at 4, which people are welcome to go to, or they can stay here if you really have some specific questions. Before we go, though, I really want to give a huge shout out to Andrew for organizing this whole session. People in the chat are like so inspired, and you and Mona have both cleared up like so many kind of misconceptions around different kinds of grains and how they're used and stuff. And this has just really been so wonderful. And I also want to thank all the other panelists who, you know, came on to give their time and share their passion. Grains people are very passionate. I can tell that. And so we do need to move on to the next session. You are welcome to stay in here if there's a few people that want to ask questions, but be sure to, when you're done, then jump over to the other session. I don't want to delay them starting. So it's up to people who are watching. It's up to you what you want to do. And with that, I'll say thanks again.
We can hang here for a bit.
Okay.
I don't want to steal the audience from the other event.
That session just opened up, so I think it's going to take them a couple minutes to get everybody on and settled and stuff like that. So
if there are any questions, let me see real quick. I'm looking forward to trying new things with our students. Claudia, how have you used and processed amaranth? Have you?
Not amaranth, but we have played with quinoa and buckwheat, which is another amazing seed to work with. Yeah.
Mona, do you work with amaranth?
You know, not straight up in the bread making, but I would think you could make a porridge with amaranth and add that.
I do that.
Because that is, you know, amaranth is another grain that, you know, it's a little kooky in terms of the texture and the feel. So that could be one way to approach using it.
I've played with making porridges and something approximating risotto using sorghum,
right,
using buckwheat.
Yeah.
I love it with buckwheat, and I haven't tried making well, I did make an amaranth porridge, but not a risotto.
Right.
It was more of a breakfast porridge.
Yeah, and you know, we didn't even get a chance to touch on using any of these grains in their whole form. You know, not necessarily milling them, but making, like you said, quote unquote risottos out of these different wheat varietals, or even any of the grains that you would normally use. So that's a whole nother discussion about using whole grains.
And I just bought some fonio for that's one of the most obscure grains for us. Fonio is from West Africa, and I bought it online because I'm dying to try it, and I haven't yet. But the grains are microscopic practically. I mean, they're so tiny.
Yep.
But it's supposed to be good for porridge. And it's also a good substitute for people who are gluten-free, like quinoa. It's also a good substitute for in tabbouleh instead of bulgur, if you're gluten-free.
Yep.
Quinoa works well, but so does amaranth.
You know, in terms of gluten-free, we also craft pastas with buckwheat, chia seeds, and quinoa. So they are 3 different kinds of gluten-free, you know, grains and seeds that work pretty well. And the chia seeds, they have that gelatinous quality that you make for the lack of gluten.
I have not. Have you, Mona, used any quinoa in a bread?
You know, I haven't. I'm thinking that in the Tartine 3 book, there is a quinoa porridge, just off the top of my head, but I haven't used it.
Now I have to go do that. Got to start trying these gluten-free grains.
Yes.
I did just successfully make a gluten-free pita bread, but not out of a porridge. It was out of a combination of buckwheat and cassava, and I'm blanking on the third ingredient.
I saw your post. It looked good.
Yeah, they turned out well.
Yeah. Any other questions here? Or?
Yeah, let me see. I think that was it. I just want to encourage people, if you want to watch the other session, that they're about to begin, and I don't want us to be rude by stealing your attention here, but it's great to have it's been great to have you here, and thanks so much for coming. Thank you, Claudia and Mona. This is really a treat. Nice to hear from both of you, very different perspectives on the use of grain, and how we can incorporate it into the kitchen.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.